Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Good news. Let's start with some good news. Right from the start, right out of the gate, good news. Yesterday on the big program, we had a couple of folks on from Meriter Hospital there in Madison, Wisconsin. Michael and Hanan came on to share their story. The hospital and the workers have been negotiating for a new contract since March 8th. Contentious. It was a little difficult. They were, at odds. The good folks came on to talk about, hey, listeners, how about you giving Sue, our CEO, a call? How about putting a little elbow grease into it, send an email, doing some stuff like that? Well, I'm here to tell you, thanks to you, and we're going to take some credit for this. And of course, the organizer, the negotiation committee, they have now a tentative agreement. They got evidently a pretty substantial raise. Good for them. And also 60 hours of paid time off to recover from the pandemic. So, and much more. The ratification vote is on Monday. Good for them. Congratulations, all of the workers there, the service and support workers there at Meriter Hospital in Madison, Wisconsin. Good for you guys. Glad we could have you on. Get a little push to get you over the top. And thank you, our listeners who did reach out and call. I know there were a number of people who did. We got some responses from folks who had some wonderful stories about the workers there at that hospital. So good stuff. So very happy to bring that to you, and thank everyone who took a moment to make a phone call, send an email, get involved and help these workers out. They deserve it. They earned it. They truly are our frontline heroes. They truly are patriotic. They're certainly essential. So good on them. Let's get to it. You've got Vlad today saying that the West, the West, they're trying to cancel Russia. Yeah. It's an economic blitzkrieg that the West is pulling. Yeah. Rambling a bit, the Putin is. And look, this is not going well for him. Not at all. Because you've got the U.S. president, Joe Biden, saying that, yeah, Vlad's a war criminal. If you're paying even a little bit of attention to what's going on in Ukraine, when this is over, I don't know how war crimes aren't front and center. Now today, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky was over the video machine, did the Zoom in, the video conference call to Congress. All of our senators and Congress people were there. Everyone, I believe, standing and applauding. The reports are that Marjorie Taylor Greene not applauding. Don't care, could care less about that train wreck. But he had an interesting talk. Kind of equated this idea of a humanitarian no-fly zone. Talked about the need for aircraft. Interesting way that he spun, Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech to "I have a need." This was kind of his "I have a need" speech. I have a need to protect our skies from missiles raining down and killing my citizens. Mr. President of the United States, be the leader of the world, be the peace leader of the world, was his message. And look, he did a great job. He did what he had to do. He called for all American companies to get out of Russia, to make this all very painful, to make it economically painful on Russia. The idea of peace over profits, I liked how that was framed. He did call for a new kind of organization since NATO in this moment is failing him, since he's not in. This idea of something called a U-24. the idea of kind of a new NATO to deal with natural disasters, man-made disasters. Think war, think famine, think, hurricanes, tornadoes, think any disaster. This is what he was talking about. A way to immediately to respond and not have a bureaucracy to have to deal with. Because look, Zelensky understands on a certain level that us getting involved and having planes engaging Russia over Ukrainian skies is World War III. And as much as he says, hey, be the American president, be the leader of the world, be the the peace leader of the world, he's got to know that that's not going to happen. And everybody who put him up on that screen, they've got to know it's not going to happen. Never going to happen. Biden said it's not going to happen. But by pushing it, by putting it out there and pushing it in and making people maybe look a little uncomfortable, look a little bad, and then showing that heartbreaking video. Oh, look, I give Zelensky credit. I give their video team credit. They have used social media very effectively. And look, when you're being massacred, it's kind of hard not to look sympathetic. And this is where the heartstrings get pulled. And if you remember that, the polling done right away is, the vast majority of Americans want us to get involved and impose not us, but NATO, which basically is us, to impose a no-fly zone. And I said from the beginning, no, under no circumstances, no-fly zone. That can't happen. No, under no circumstances, no. And this is that moment where, okay, now the president looks bad because we're not doing this no-fly zone. But what I argue is, and this could be a game changer, we're not going to put our planes and our soldiers and our people into direct conflict. But today, a massive military aid package almost, didn't even blink eyes, didn't get much of a response. Ukraine's getting U.S. drones. Cutting-edge guided missile U.S. drones with, these are game changers. These are the Switchblades 300 and 600s, which evidently have been sold to U.S. Special Operations Command. They're manufactured by this AeroVironment. They're going to make a ton of money off of this. But this is a game changer in this. This is going to give Ukraine an opportunity to stop some of the forward movement of the Russian convoy and the Russian soldiers. Went without any response. Because look, we look bad on the international stage that we're not going to impose this no-fly zone. So as a consolation, here's this. And you got to think that was done on purpose. Because you had to know you weren't getting this, so you got the other thing. And the thing is most Americans now agree with Biden. Because here's the thing, I go back to the beginning. Thank goodness Joe Biden is president in this moment, because he has provided the calm, steady leadership that we have needed. Not overreacting, calm, cool, calculating. And the American people are coming around. The latest Quinnipiac poll finds that Americans approve of NATO's decision not to enforce a no-fly zone, 54 to 32. 75% say that we should be doing whatever we can do to help Ukraine without risking a direct war with Russia. And that's exactly what Joe Biden is doing. Just 17% said we should do whatever it takes to help Ukraine, even if that means direct war. I am not in that 17%. I think you've got to give Ukraine everything that they need, and these drones are a big part of this, a big start. But I find it interesting that nothing out of Putin, nothing yet. Now, I did watch the speech. I saw all of the speech that President Zelensky gave, and I did watch all of the senators and all the Congress people and all of the Republicans. All of the Republicans who didn't vote to impeach and remove Donald Trump back in 2019. And I couldn't help but think, and this is one of those moments where, as I'm watching Zelensky in his green T-shirt, which some conservative commentator very upset that Zelensky wasn't in a suit. You can't make this up. You cannot make it up that there was a commentator that didn't wear a suit. I'm going, wait a second, are you kidding? His name's Peter Schiff. He tweeted out today, he said, I understand hard times are hard, but doesn't the president of Ukraine own a suit? I don't have much respect for current members of U.S. Congress either, but I still wouldn't address them wearing a T-shirt. I wouldn't want to disrespect the institution of the United States. Who in the hell is Peter Schiff? And someone should smack him upside the head, because this guy's living in a war zone. It's probably it looks like the same T-shirt he had on the first time he spoke, because he's dodging bullets. But hey, Peter Schiff said so. So everybody worry about him not having a suit on. Someone needs to slap Peter Schiff. Maybe his mother. Maybe his mother should slap him. But here's the thing. Every one of those Republicans who had suits on, by the way, very well dressed, very prim proper, and doing the golf clap. Why isn't Peter Schiff asking them? Here's a question. Here's a question for Peter Schiff. Why aren't you asking any of those Republicans who voted to acquit Donald Trump back in 2019 why they did that? Why they're not responsible for what's going on in the Ukraine right now? Ask them, what responsibility do they have as they're standing there clapping and saying that Zelensky's a hero and how wonderful Zelensky is? Where were they back in 2019? Because remember, understand what 2019 was about. Understand why Donald Trump was impeached. He was strong-arming Zelensky to dig up dirt on Joe Biden. He was strong-arming a newly elected leader of a country that has got Vladimir Putin breathing down his neck, soldiers on the border ready to come in and invade. This is not new. This was coming for a while. And yet you got Trump taking an opportunist saying, well, I know Putin, and I know Putin's at your doorstep. I know he's got eyes on coming in and taking over. I know that. And I know we've promised you a whole bunch of military aid, because that's what we were giving him, right? We were supposed to be giving him all this stuff to help him protect his country from the Russian invasion, right? This is what it was. We'll give you the things that you desperately need if you give me what I want. This was the quid pro quo. This is what it was. Go find me the dirt I want, even if you have to make it up. And you look at what's going on in Ukraine right now. This is what Zelensky understood. This is what Trump knew Zelensky would understand, which is why he did it. And to Zelensky's credit, he didn't. He didn't make it up. He didn't lie. But you know what? Every one of these Republicans, like Joni Ernst, freaking Joni Breadbag Ernst, who I respected over the bread bags, but this thing now makes me want to throw on my uniform and go help. Bull! Where were you? Where was your courage in 19 when it would have mattered and you could have done something back then? And you look at all of these Republicans who were cowards in the moment that it mattered. That's the frustrating part of me. The only Republican, just one, in 2019. Justin Amash of Michigan. Just one. And he ended up getting drummed out of Congress. He actually retired because he knew he was going to get drummed out. Just one. One out of 248 had the courage to say what Trump did was wrong. That's it. Just one. And now look where we are. We've got a madman who's invading another country. And we've got the military-industrial complex just thrilled because we're on the brink of World War III. We're giving, huge amounts of money to these war profiteers. I remember, reading the book 1984 in high school, understanding that the economy in the book was a war economy. They needed war. If they had too much stuff, they had to have war to blow things up so they could make it again. That's one part of it. Here's the scariest part, though. The scariest part is that while Putin is saying he doesn't intend on occupying Ukraine, he did have some rambling bit today that I thought was quite scary. He warned that it's time to cleanse Russia of scum and traitors. His exact quote was, quote, "Any people, and particularly the Russian people, will always be able to tell apart the patriots from the scum and traitors and spit them out like a midge that accidentally flew into their mouths." He says, "I'm convinced that this natural and necessary self-cleansing of society will only strengthen our country, our solidarity, cohesion, and readiness to meet any challenge." This sounds like in-house in Russia, there's going to be an ethnic cleansing, an ideological cleansing. But also in Ukraine, and I fear across the region, this sounds like the ramblings of an absolute madman, but an ideological madman, a pure Mother Russia. And I'll tell you, this kind of language, this kind of self-cleansing, this kind of cohesion and solidarity, this is just the kind of rhetoric the right wing loves. It's scary stuff. But this is what the extreme religious right, this is music to their ears. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Remember, you can always download the podcast, take the program on the go wherever you go if you miss any of the program. Going to take a quick break. On the other side, want to get some of your thoughts on, who's going to be vacationing in Russia, and maybe 4th of July is coming around. Any Republicans going to be showing up in Moscow? Maybe Ron Johnson. Who knows? Quick break. Right back. Stick around. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our Labor History in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. Generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So evidently South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem's tempting to get her 4th of July house in order. And, again, this year wants to have it there at Mount Rushmore so she can blow off fireworks, knowing that this is something that the indigenous people not thrilled about. The various tribes are not thrilled when they blow off fireworks on their sacred land. Kind of ticks them off. Kind of makes Kristi Noem happy when she can blow things up and tick people off. So this is kind of why they do it. And my thought was, as she petitions the federal government and the National Park Service to do this for the second year and was turned down again, I'm like, why not just have it on your land? You're the governor of a freaking state, for sake. No, we have to make a point. And that point is that, we're mad at the federal government. And that's all this is really about. They could have their little shindig wherever they want. There's a lot of places, a lot of beautiful open spaces in South Dakota. Lots of open spaces. Really, lots. Lots and lots, actually. And really a lot of open spaces in South Dakota that are owned by the state. The national parks, owned by the Park Service, not owned by the state. The governor could have say over any of the other stuff. But, like any child where a parent says, no, you can't do that here, it's like a fetish. And if you get the double whammy of I get to do something that someone tells me no, and I get to tick my neighbors off, well, double win, bonus points. And I'm glad that the Biden administration has said, no, I don't think so. Now, personally, I don't care if you blow fireworks off or not. Fine, have your little shindig, great, do what you got to do. But, when you're talking about, being good neighbors with other people, maybe, I don't know, maybe their thoughts you should probably take into consideration. Just a thought. Have your party, do your thing, be responsible, be a decent neighbor, care about others for once. Maybe a thought. Now, 4th of July is coming up, and I am wondering, how many Republicans will be showing up to Moscow this 4th of July. I don't think many this time, but I am interested to find out how much Russian money was flowing through their coffers. And I think as we go down the road and more is exposed about, who's taken what, we're looking at Florida and Ron DeSantis and which Russian billionaire funded his campaign. And I think this is healthy. I think we need to find out just how deep the Russian oligarchs are into the Republican Party. How deep, and look, if they're in the Democratic Party, you gotta flush that out too. This isn't just one-sided. You have got to find how deep that money is into our political system. And we should be doing the same thing with the Chinese and everyone else. It's time to clear up the system. It's time to purify this system and find out, who owns what, and start exposing stuff, which is why we need major campaign finance law reform. And I know nobody's talking about this yet. I know nobody's really concerned because there's still people, dying in Ukraine. But ultimately, this was allowed to happen because you had a madman as our president for 4 years who didn't care about what Putin did, who was literally going to pull us out of NATO, who was literally going to let this happen, I believe would have just walked away. So for me, we got to find out, and we got to find out all of it. It's that simple. We got a lot of work to do and a lot of exposing to do. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Make sure you grab the podcast whenever you can. Share it with friends, neighbors, coworkers, all over. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, just passed up the 1-year anniversary of the American Rescue Plan. Going to get some thoughts on how that's worked out and maybe where things are going from here. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1911. That was the day Big Bill Haywood of the Industrial Workers of the World gave his speech on the general strike. He presented it in New York City at a fundraiser for the Bucafori Defense Fund. Vincent Bucafori was a shop representative for his union. He faced repeated harassment and discharge by his foreman for executing his union duties. Finally, as witnesses described, the foreman fired Bucafori and punched him, drawing blood. Then he came at Bucafori with a heavy object. Bucafori shot and killed him in self-defense. He was charged with manslaughter, convicted, and sentenced to 10 years at Sing Sing prison. The IWW raised money for his defense and fought for his acquittal and release. Haywood arrived at the fundraiser to deliver the keynote speech titled The General Strike. In it, he reviewed the rich history of workers' actions since the days of the Paris Commune in 1871. He also raged against electoral reform. He stated, quote, "The broadest interpretation of political power comes through the industrial organization. It gives the vote to women. It re-enfranchises the black man and places the ballot in the hands of every boy and girl employed in a shop. Makes them eligible to take part in the general strike. Makes them eligible to legislate for themselves where they are most interested in changing conditions, namely in the place where they work." He continued, quote, "You have all the industries in your hands at the present time. There is justification for political action, and that is to control the forces of the capitalists that they use against us. That is the reason that you should fully understand the power of the ballot." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us at Labor History in 2.
In corporate speak, there are no, quote, job cuts. Instead, firings are blandly referred to as employment adjustments. Now, though, corporate wordsmiths will need a whole new thesaurus of euphemisms, for masses of job cuts are coming for employees in the higher echelons of the corporate structure. Don't look now, but an unanticipated result of the ongoing pandemic is that it has given cover for CEOs to speed up the adoption of highly advanced RPAs, robotic process automation, to replace employees once assumed to be immune from displacement. As one analyst told a New York Times reporter, with RPA, you can build a bot that costs $10,000 a year and take out 2 to 4 humans. Prior to the COVID crisis, many top executives feared a public backlash if they pushed automation too far too fast. But ironically, the economic collapse caused by the pandemic has so discombobulated the workplace and diverted public attention that corporate bosses have been emboldened to rush ahead. While the nationwide shutdown of offices and furloughing of employees has caused misery for millions, one happy purveyor of RPA systems notes that it has, quote, massively raised awareness among executives about the variety of work that no longer requires human involvement. He cheerfully declares, "We think any business process can be automated," advising corporate bosses that half to 2/3 of all the tasks being done at their companies can be done by machines. This is Jim Hightower saying, conventional corporate wisdom blithely preaches that all new technologies create more jobs than they kill. But even these Pollyannish preachers are now conceding that this robotic automation of white-collar jobs is being imposed so widely, suddenly, and stealthily that losses will crush any gains.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So we just passed up the 1-year anniversary of the American Rescue Plan's anniversary. And look, this is one of the most important accomplishments of this administration. And I love when people say, well, you know, Biden hasn't gotten anything done. No, he's gotten, and look, even with as divided as Congress has been, they've gotten some major legislation moved through. You know, this American Rescue Plan was huge in cutting child poverty in half, getting health care to people, helping workers at the time that they needed, helping small businesses so much at the time, not to mention the bipartisan infrastructure bill that's going to help rebuild a huge portion of our infrastructure. Granted, it was only about a quarter of what we need, but good first step. But to look at the 1-year anniversary and what it did and maybe what needs to be done going forward, I've asked Lily Roberts to come talk with us. Lily is the managing director of the Poverty to Prosperity team over at the Center for American Progress. Their website, americanprogress.org. Lily, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So the 1-year anniversary of this major piece of legislation that I argue again made millions of people's lives tolerable, bearable, and maybe just a little bit better in one of the worst periods in our at least in my lifetime. I'll go with that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of hard to remember back to this time last year, but millions and millions of people hadn't had access to a vaccine yet. We were coming out of a really awful winter of COVID, sort of most people getting vaccinated. We were really still dealing with that fallout from the huge spike in unemployment, a high of 14.7% back in April of 2020. And even though, as you mentioned, the American Rescue Plan, a lot of its effects were sort of a one-time only, benefit or, temporary improvement, it really showed the benefits of investing in a more durable social safety net and in centering policies on the people and the communities who were, suffering the most and who have historically been left behind during economic recoveries.
Now let's talk about the big one. Obviously, for me, the vaccine was the big part of this. It got, the vaccines out. We got them made. We got them out to people. Built a logistics system to get them out as quickly as possible. Because look, in President Biden's defense, there wasn't much of a system, and I guess fortunately for him, there wasn't something that was badly built that I would guess the former guy would have bungled from the beginning. So if there is a bright side that Trump didn't even try, so there was nothing to unbungle, I guess that would be the only bright side for me in this. But that he did basically from scratch, move forward and get this taken care of. This should be a huge feather in this guy's cap.
Absolutely. I mean, if you, again, thinking back to winter sort of 2020 going into 2021, they were able to get set up so quickly these, vaccine centers all over the country, using FEMA, using the National Guard, all of these ways where they got vaccines really quickly out into communities, and had other healthcare benefits as well in there, making sure that people who had been unemployed in 2020 or 2021 could access, marketplace sort of ACA, Obamacare, marketplace health insurance, all sorts of provisions to make sure that people could get healthy even in the midst of a pandemic. It's amazing to note that even in this huge unemployment crisis that we've had over the past 2 years, the uninsured proportion of Americans actually decreased because people were able to get access to the marketplace health insurance.
And I think that's an extremely important part of this. Even during, mass unemployment where millions of jobs were lost, millions of people unemployed, they still weren't put at health risk because there was this social safety net, which I think in this moment should be something that should be, shouted from the mountaintops, something Democrats should be taking, just absolute credit for, saying, look, we have this safety net. We should be strengthening this moving forward. We should be making this permanent instead of at this moment where I guess, in a very short period of time, that part of this goes away and all of these people fall off. And then what happens?
Yeah, I mean, we really learned both the sort of social benefits and the economic benefits of infusing a lot of, support and relief to the people who needed it very quickly. The thing that would have been a really, what you want to ward against when you're an economist figuring out how the economy works is you don't want what's called a double dip recession, where, you have this unemployment spike, you have a crisis, and then there are all of these follow-on effects where, maybe state governments start having to cut their budgets. So all of the state government employees who have good, middle-class jobs, they lose their jobs. Or, people have to start cutting back and then they're consuming less. So there's less sort of retail and, sort of goods and services spending. That largely didn't happen in this recession, which is kind of nothing short of miraculous. There was so much of an infusion of support, those economic impact payments, the unemployment insurance benefits that people got, the child tax credit expansion. It kept spending afloat, and it meant that the people who have the jobs that, depend on that spending were able to keep those jobs. And that's a really incredible success of the last 2 years.
And there were jobs to go back to. I mean, this is the other part of this. And, we're talking about inflation and everyone's losing their mind over inflation. The reason people have so much money to demand the goods that aren't there is a part and parcel to that, people were kept afloat because of, this legislation and because of Biden's policy. Now, I know people are saying, see, all this inflation is Joe Biden's fault. Well, he could have gone the, screw you route and the austerity route and let people starve, right? That could be the option, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you can see around the world, almost all countries are dealing with inflation at this point because of those sort of COVID backlogs and, shipping delays and all of those things. But other countries didn't get the equivalent of the rescue plan. So in those countries, people don't have the spending power and inflation is going up. I'd rather have inflation plus increased spending power, not just the inflation.
Yeah. No. I said the spending was great. It was helpful. Would have been great if it was a little bit more for some folks, a little bit less for others. If we'd have done a little bit, because there's still some folks at the bottom, the working poor in this country still got the shaft. Would have been great to see a little bit of help for them. That's where for me, that's where the child tax credit comes in. And I want to get your thoughts on that as well, Lily. You listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Lily Roberts. She's the managing director of the Poverty to Prosperity team there at the Center for American Progress, AmericanProgress.org, their website. If you got a thought, question, comment, give us a yell, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. If you're just joining us, make sure you grab the podcast so you never miss a moment. But, that child tax credit part of it, which I thought was so important. And, what we found out is just a meager amount of money, $250 per kid over the age of 6, 300 under the age of 5 and under, cut child poverty almost in half. And you go $250 per kid per month. That's almost nothing when you think in the grand scheme of things, when you're talking about cutting childhood poverty in freaking half. And we can't afford that. I mean, I'm at a loss.
We absolutely can afford it, and we can't afford not to keep doing it. It's one of those things where it has incredible benefits right away for the kids and for the families that it was going to. It has incredible impacts for the economy going down the line. I mean, there are studies that show that, that amount of money more per month, something like $200 or $300 more per month for a family, means that a kid is more likely to go to college. They're going to earn more. They're going to pay more taxes in 20 years. It's one of those things that's so silly not to do, not to support children and families in that way, especially for young kids. We know that it makes a huge difference for kids under 6 when their families are more stable, when they can put more food on the table, when they can afford to have a high quality childcare provider or, whatever it is that they need so that the parents can go to work, support themselves long term. It's a huge loss to take that away.
Yeah, I look at it this way, and I have an interesting take on it because look, I grew up as in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. My mother and I were on and off welfare for years when I was a kid, and I remember how difficult things were. You wouldn't judge it now, but there was nothing in the cupboards at the end of the month most months because food stamps never went as far as the right wing would love us to believe they do. But I thought I think it's kind of a cruel trick that they've pulled on poor and working class families to go, here's what's possible. Here's this extra help. We're going to make sure that there's food at the end of the month. We're going to make sure that you don't have to worry about, making sure that there's clothes for your kids or a roof over their head. You're going to have this little extra stability. And then in the worst fashion after Christmas to just yank it away. I go back and I think about when I was a kid, I didn't realize we were poor. I didn't realize we had it any worse than anybody else. To give that kind of glimpse of hope and then to rip it away like that, and then have someone like Joe Manchin who reportedly believes we can't because their parents are just going to use it on drugs or booze it's just cruel, I think. I'm going to use the word cruel.
I think that's a good characterization of it. It's so upsetting to know this has been framed around, we've been in this crisis. And it's like, well, a lot of families were already in a crisis. Many families over the past 2 years, they didn't change they weren't able to work from home and, learn to make sourdough or whatever it was that people were doing in those first couple months of the pandemic. They were still having to go to work. They were still making $7.25 an hour. Maybe their kids' school was closed for a time. Maybe their daycare shut down entirely. Those families were already in crisis, and even little things could put them over the edge. So that meager amount of money every month was such a lifesaver for families. It's interesting, the whole of the American Rescue Plan, it reduced poverty overall, kids and adults, by about 20%. But for kids alone, it was sort of north of 40%. And that's just a really remarkable sort of single intervention to get you so far towards alleviating childhood poverty in this country.
In looking at the numbers, Lily, just brass tacks, when you're talking about the kind of money that we're spending on something to alleviate childhood poverty, because I'm worried about every kid in this country. I want no child in the wealthiest country in the history of civilization at its wealthiest moment to go to bed tonight or any night hungry. Give me an example of what we could do to make that happen. Is it a tax credit that we could take away from corporate America? I mean, is there something that we're, if we have to pay for it, where do we get it from?
We get it from billionaires. We get it from, millionaires too. We get it from corporations. I mean, there are all of the new additional taxes that we could add back on. There are the tax cuts from 2017, from those Trump tax cuts that went to billionaires and corporations that we could repeal. There's also even just the silliest part of all of this, which is the tax enforcement. So the IRS is so understaffed, and it's so complicated to go after really, really rich people and corporations who, have all of the tax lawyers and accountants in the world to sort of hide their money in creative ways. The IRS doesn't have the resources to investigate those people. So all of the tax audits that they do, almost all of them, go towards people who are receiving the EITC, something that's only eligible, only sort of working class people are eligible for, because it's much simpler to go after people with simpler money. If we staffed the IRS and gave them more capacity to do these investigations, to actually enforce the rules that are already on the books, we could get enormously far in, cutting childhood poverty, in giving more people access to SNAP and other programs that are really necessary. It's not even, there are all of the things we can do to improve the tax code, but then there's also just enforce the rules that we already have.
Yeah, well, it's always easier to kick the poor, isn't it? It's always easier to kick the weakling than it is to go after the billionaires and these big corporations. Yeah, it's always easier to go after them. And look, we've been doing it. This isn't new. It's easy to blame the poor for being poor. It's easy to blame, working class families for struggling. Hey, you should just go out and work harder. And yet we don't seem to have a problem with CEOs who are making obscene profits, with corporate Americas whose profit margins are growing larger and larger. And the hardest days work a lot of our wealth class folks do is taking money from my pocket and putting it into theirs. There is a serious problem with how we view poverty in this country. And I'm sure you know this better than anyone.
Well, and there's also this element here of we're coming out of nearly 40 years of defunding these services that people really need because they were for poor people, and we saw that come to a head in the crisis of the early days of 2020. Think back to the people who had to spend days on the phone with the unemployment insurance office in their state because state governments had been cutting unemployment insurance offices for decades in order to give that money as tax credits to the wealthy or cut taxes for corporations in their state. And that's who they always choose to target for these things that are going to quote unquote save money. And then they don't actually save money for the government, because what happens is that people really need to access those services. They just don't get them because there are higher barriers, and then that leads to all kinds of other costs. No. It's a really silly way to plan your long-term economic health, but that's who they're interested in, is serving.
So while the American Rescue Plan was a wild success, and it was, and I give Biden credit for it, I give the Democrats who voted for it the utmost credit for it, because we needed it. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. I wish we could extend it a little bit longer. I wish we could get the Build Back Better plan moved through and get some more investments into our future. But going forward, how do we address some of these concerns? How do we make sure that people understand what's happening as these things happen? What's the messaging going forward from now till Election Day? I know you're not political, but part of this is the messaging of what's going to be happening to people and making sure they understand why.
Well, a big thing that's going to happen now over the next couple of months is that a big portion of the American Rescue Plan went to states and cities. And states and cities have control over a lot of this money. They can use it to serve the needs of their communities. And we're seeing amazing stories coming out of I was hearing mayors this week from Sacramento and St. Paul that are talking about addressing homelessness crisis and affordable housing in their cities with this money. They're supporting food banks and other sort of places where people go to access food when they don't have food to put on the table. Cities, you mentioned your hometown of Cleveland, they're focused on lead remediation with a lot of these dollars. There are a lot of really great stories coming out of the money that's going to cities and states, and they're able to prioritize, figure out what the real needs are in a way that the federal government can't always do. So I think that that's going to be a really important story over the next couple of months. But I do think that we can't just depend on the states and cities to solve the lingering problems of the past, that were sort of laid bare by the past 2 years, but that really predated the pandemic. There was a wonderful infusion of support into the childcare industry, for example, in the American Rescue Plan, and it sort of staved off a crisis because so many of those businesses, childcare businesses, are really low margins. They're, operating on a shoestring out of somebody's house often. And they really needed that support from the government. That's something that underpins so much labor in this country. It allows, mostly women, but a lot of parents and caregivers to go to work every day. And that infusion of cash was really incredible, but it's not going to last long term. And that's an industry that needs, critical support or the whole thing falls apart. And I'm really concerned that if Congress doesn't get their act together to, do some of these really long-term interventions, we're going to be just back where we started.
Yeah. Let's hope they get something done. Let's hope we can move in a direction to make families' lives better, to help children get better opportunities and fix some of these problems that we've seen. Lily, I appreciate the time. Good stuff. Thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks so much.
Good stuff. Lily Roberts, she is the managing director of the Poverty to Prosperity team there at the Center for American Progress. Make sure you check out the work that they do at AmericanProgress.org. Going to take a quick break right here. Back with your thoughts, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Also, if you're just joining us, make sure you grab the podcast from iTunes to iHeart, Podbean to Stitcher, and everywhere in between. Grab the program, take it on the go. Quick break, right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Too long have others spoken for us. Those were the words published on this day in labor history. The year was 1827. This was the message of the co-editors of the Freeman's Journal, the first black newspaper in the United States. Slavery had been outlawed in New York that same year. A group of prominent free African Americans from the Northeast gathered in New York to discuss forming a newspaper. As a result, two young black New Yorkers, John Brown Russwurm and Samuel Cornish, founded the Freeman's Journal. It gave a voice to the 300,000 African Americans living in the North. Black people had been almost entirely left out of the mainstream press or were treated with racism. This new paper focused on black perspectives. It reached 11 states. Its pages covered news and events and took a stand against slavery and lynching. While the paper only lasted a few years, it had done something bigger. It launched the idea of a black press. More black-owned newspapers followed. Before the Civil War, these papers became a leading voice in the call to end the slave labor system. In the early 20th century, black newspapers in northern cities published articles, political cartoons, and advertisements about northern employment opportunities for African Americans living in the Jim Crow South. The black newspaper, the Chicago Defender, was one outlet that led this charge. In 1916, the paper published a political cartoon showing a black man with a broken ankle chain. The word labor was written across his back as he headed toward a train car labeled Northern Industries. It's estimated that 1.5 million African Americans moved north during the Great Migration between 1915 and 1930, transforming the labor force of northern cities.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Question, comment, something on your mind, give us a call. Let's go to the phone lines. Got Constance on line one. Constance, how are you today?
Well, I'm better after watching your show, dear. Your show is delightful to have discovered.
Thank you so much.
Telling my husband donate and everything. And one thing, that everybody seems to overlook is in the 80s, remember how they bribed all of the Congress people to up the taxes of the farmers, and then they bought their farms? The Koch brothers have been trying to destroy our country from inside out.
Absolutely.
We have Nazis in our Republican Party, and they are trying to destroy America for what it is and has always been, the beacon of hope, and it's got to be that again. I love Biden, but by golly, anybody that votes against our farms has voted against the people of America.
There you go.
And our waters mean everything. These people think they can destroy our country and then move off to New Zealand or someplace, and I hope New Zealand tells them to get lost. And they think they can hide on their little yachts that these oligarchs and people have. Well, how about somebody go there in a little old submarine and put a bomb on the bottom of it? How would they like them apples? I'm crippled. I have a broken back. They don't need to worry about it being me. But it's just a suggestion. Well, they're fighting fire with fire. They want to kill us. Maybe it's time we threaten them. God damn them, I hate them.
There you go, Constance.
And I am 1,000%. I'm a God-fearing woman.
I hear you.
And I believe in being good.
I hear you.
And
no, I feel. Look, I'm with you with the anger. I appreciate the thoughts. Thank you. Please call again. Thank you so much.
All right, darling.
Let's quick go to Eric on line 2 before we have to hit the break at the bottom of the hour. Eric, what's on your mind?
Hey, Brother Rick, just wanted to share. I heard you were talking about IRS, and it's kind of funny that, you don't hear any Republicans saying that when you fund the IRS, for every dollar you spend, you get way more back in return. Last I checked, you had like $6 or $7 in return. But then a lot of these guys that want to go back to, hey, let's go back to the original intent. Well, yeah, let's go back to the original intent. You take a look at a 1913 income tax return. You adjust that for inflation. Anybody making under $83,000 a year wouldn't pay anything in taxes.
Right.
There it is. So who's trumpeting that? That's an easy trumpeting, point for and Republicans aren't talking about that? Please.
I'm right there with you, Eric. I appreciate it, man. Great stuff.
Good stuff.
Thanks, man. Appreciate the call. No, I mean, you go back and, like, as Eric points out, if you go back to the original thought of it, the rich would be paying the tax, and corporate America. I mean, that's how the country was funded for years on corporate taxes. You go back to, the Eisenhower tax code where, the corporate tax rates were 56%. Where the top marginal tax rate on the very wealthy was 92% at the very top. You don't hear the Republicans, out there saying, no, hey, let's have a sane, rational tax code. No, it's all about taxing poor people. Think about Rick Scott's plan. Rick Scott is all about taxing those 47% of the people who Mitt Romney mocked for not paying taxes. The people who don't earn enough money to be in that tax bracket. The 47% of us who would love to pay federal taxes, because it would mean they would be earning more money. It's all about keeping the very wealthy, very wealthy. And again, you go back to, and I've said this 1,000 times, you look at from Reagan forward, the explosion of the wealth class in this country, the number of billionaires in the extreme accumulation of wealth at the very top. And it has everything to do with Reagan's assault on our tax code and the conservative assault on our tax code. That's simple. Appreciate the call, Eric. Thanks so much. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
The adverse health effects alone from power plant-related pollution are valued at $80 billion per year.
Biden EPA unveils new rules to clean up deadly smog and truck pollution.
Australia is becoming a harder country to live in. because of these natural disasters.
Australia pummeled by weeks of torrential rains and deadly floods. Plus,
the energy firm saw fourth quarter profits hit their highest in 8 years.
Consumers pay at the pump while big oil pulls in big bucks.
All of that profiteering and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Freeman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
President Biden has hosted electric vehicle stakeholders here at the White House. Would he host oil and gas producers, the people who are the most affected by the Putin price hike?
By the most affected, you mean the ones who are making the most money? Peter Doocy of Fox News, you imbecile? This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, the Russian invasion of Ukraine continues to roil the energy markets.
Yes, indeed it does. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has underscored how nations remain extraordinarily dependent on fossil fuels, even as they try to shore up supplies. At the same time, scientists are warning the world must slash fossil fuel use to avoid catastrophic climate impact. Bloomberg News on Monday reported that China plans a massive increase in coal mining to dramatically reduce its reliance on fossil fuel imports.
Great plan.
That will undercut China's climate policies in the near term. The Russian invasion has also laid bare the strategic vulnerability of fossil fuel dependence that can be wielded both as an energy weapon and an economic weapon. Officials report the Russian military has seized major gas infrastructure in eastern Ukraine, cutting off supplies to nearly 1 million people amid below-freezing temperatures. Officials also say that late last week, Russian troops seized 2 compressor stations along a major gas pipeline from Russia to Europe that crosses Ukraine, a tacit warning that they can cut off all Russian gas imports to Europe.
The petro wars continue, and I guess they're going to continue until we get off this addiction.
The price of crude oil fell below $100 on global markets Monday after not quite reaching all-time highs that were set back in 2008. The surge in crude oil prices triggered instant price hikes for consumers at the pump over the last 2 weeks, but despite the drop in crude oil prices, it will likely take weeks for gas prices to fall for consumers.
That's a pretty good scam. So the price of oil futures goes up, so does the price at the pump. The price of futures comes down. Well, we'll see about lowering it maybe sometime next month.
Exactly.
Wow.
But oil industry profit margins in 2021 and the first quarter of 2022 have hit their highest levels in 8 years.
Sure they have.
Senate Democrats have introduced legislation to enact a windfall profit tax, alleging the oil industry is profiteering off of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Alleging?
But that won't stop oil industry CEOs from cashing in. According to a new analysis by nonprofit groups Friends of the Earth and Bailout Watch, over just the last month, as Russia moved to invade Ukraine, big oil CEOs sold millions of dollars worth of shares, pulling in a combined profit of nearly $99 million. And over the last year, the CEOs of the 5 biggest oil companies together personally gained $8 billion in wealth.
Nice corrupt work if you can get it.
A national emergency in Australia.
There is no flood event that has occurred in this part of Australia like this in anyone's living or recorded memory.
Conservative Prime Minister Scott Morrison declared a national emergency after more than 2 weeks of climate change-intensified record rainfall inundated vast areas from Brisbane to Sydney. The floods are being called one of Australia's worst ever disasters and have killed at least 22 people, rendered thousands of homes uninhabitable, and caused billions of dollars in damages. Numerous studies show intense precipitation events are becoming more common with man-made global warming. Finally, some good news. Noting that air pollution doesn't stay within state lines, the Biden Environmental Protection Agency unveiled new standards to cut nitrogen oxide, a pollutant released by power and chemical plants and other industries, and a key ingredient of ozone-related smog. The new rule targets pollutants that drift across state lines. By 2026, EPA projects that every dollar invested in meeting the new rule will return $9 in public benefits. As EPA Chief Michael Regan explained at an energy conference last week, clearing the air literally saves lives.
Every year, pollution from power plants causes 8,000 fine particle and ozone-related premature deaths, tens of thousands of new asthma cases, thousands of heart attacks, and millions of lost school and work days.
The Biden EPA also announced new tailpipe rules for heavy trucks, the biggest polluters on the road, for the first time in decades.
Tyranny. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I see the cost of a barrel of oil has fallen under $100, and the memes all over social media are quite accurate. It was under $100 for a while as it was starting to climb because fear. The fear that the price was going to go up, and the prices at the pump skyrocketed immediately on the fears that the price of the barrel was going to go up. But now that the actual barrel cost has gone down, and pretty heavily down, well, it's going to take a little longer for us to get the price at the pump down. Seems, well, kind of interesting. Now, they're going to argue, it takes time, we've got the supply, we've got to get everything out of the system. Yeah, I don't understand why one works and one doesn't. Maybe I need an economist to explain it to me a little bit better. That's why I've asked my good friend Matias Vernango to come talk with us. He's an economics professor at Bucknell University and probably one of the smartest guys I know on the economic front. That's why I've asked him to come share some thoughts. Matias, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me, Rick.
So explain this to me. How is it that when the barrel shot up on one day, immediately gas prices shot up, and now that the barrel is down, well, it's going to take a little while.
Well, the jargon is price rigidity. It's hard to come down. Prices go easily up, but down, things come down hardly. So I think that the justification you'll hear more seriously is that short-term fluctuations will stay with us for a while. But I wouldn't disagree that it's unclear that the war is over and that this pressures will vanish. So I don't foresee. I'm sorry to say I don't foresee them. Unless we had surprising things and the price really went down, and then they'll be forced to bring it down. They're already expecting, the price to continue up and perhaps even going further up. So that would be the justification. Of course, your implicit sort of idea is correct that they're not going to push it fast back down. It's one of those things that people have to buy, and so people will adjust in other places in their pockets, and so people will go out and buy the very expensive gas and pay their electricity bills, and then they'll adjust on wherever else they can. So there is an advantage here for the oil companies, and this is not just on that. I'm sure we're going to talk about interest rate later on, and there was the whole issue of how the Biden's candidate for the board was not accepted, and this in part associated to Manchin receiving money from the oil companies. So the oil companies know where they're putting their money.
Yeah, so you just blew my whole next 10 minutes because it's exactly where I wanted to go. Because I asked that question yesterday. What is it about this woman that is so offensive? What is it about Miss Raskin that is so offensive that someone pulled Joe Manchin's card to blow this whole thing up? That the Senate Banking Committee, went nuts and held this all up and made sure that she had to pull her nomination. And I guess you just now told me.
Well, she's talking about stuff that I should say everybody has been talking for a while now, and it's all central banks, that there has to be a preoccupation with global warming, and of course that monetary policy that has an impact where credit goes, what kinds of businesses receive certain advantages, and and how credit and long-term bonds and long-term lending is done, takes into consideration, the survival of the planet, and so on and so forth. And of course, that's not necessarily something that it's good either for the oil industry or for a senator that comes from a state that, still, has significant interest from the natural gas and oil companies. So, I mean, again, don't get me wrong. I think that, from the point of view of the state, so this is not a criticism of, West Virginia and their businesses, but they should be investing on different things. And Manchin is sort of making that very hard.
Surprise, surprise. It has to do with oil and gas. Who would be surprised? Now let's talk about the interest rates. I believe they bumped them, what, 0.25%?
Yeah, I mean, in all fairness, let's put it this way. What happened today was well known, and everybody knew it was going to happen, irrespective even probably of the war in the Ukraine. Inflation has been higher. Lots of people, not just in the Republican Party and conservative sort of economists, but within the Democratic Party, I would disagree, of course, but people like Larry Summers, that was at the White House with Obama, and that this time around, in all fairness to Biden, was not part of the White House team, but he has been pushing hard for a year, and he now has more clout on the whole debate on inflation, and I think that it was somewhat inevitable that this time it would happen. Interest rates are, the base rate is practically zero, so this puts us in very low levels, still in negative in real terms. So it per se is not a big thing. The problem is that I think it indicates, they clearly indicated that it's going to go back by next year to the level pre-pandemic. So that implies that in every single meeting from here till the end of next year, they're going to be hiking interest rates unless they go faster than half a 0.25% per meeting. And so if they go fast and increase a lot, of course, that will have implications for the economy as a whole. So what happened today wasn't a surprise, but again, and it depends a little bit of what you think it's the cause of inflation and whether it's a good idea to do it. So off the bat, I'll say for inflation, it won't do anything relevant. So this is not a measure that will stop inflation, because the notion of hiking the rate of interest is that you slow down consumption, you slow down spending, borrowing, money, and hence spending, and that inflation is caused by too much demand, so that the government is giving too much money to people are spending too much money, and that's the cause of inflation. Of course, if inflation is caused by, say, problems in the supply chain, that there are not enough chips for producing cars, or that there are problems in ports, or that there is a war and the price of oil went up, then the higher interest rate doesn't do much. And then you have to be concerned with the other issues. So we still have about 2 million jobs less than at the beginning of the pandemic. And I'm sure it's been a very strong recovery. There are good reasons for the Biden administration to, say we've done a good job in terms of the recovery. Fair enough. On the other hand, it's a recovery from an economy that we know, hasn't been doing well for a long time. And it's a good economy for whom? That's the question you should be asking. So it's not been a good economy for the working class for a long time. And if you have 2 million less jobs, from my point of view, this is still not a recovery. I mean, we're not recovered from. It's not a recession. Officially, we're not in a recession. So from the point of view, but tell that to the person that it's still too afraid, or it's a woman that the school system, it's still not exactly in the same place. They couldn't find a new job, or they don't have a situation in which they can live the children. So there are lots of situations like that imply that we're not yet back where we were at the beginning of the pandemic. And, it's been 2 years already of that. And now we have considerably less, support coming from the federal government in terms of unemployment insurance, the child tax, so all of those things are expiring, gone. And so the impact on the recovery is the thing that sort of concerns me. So it's if we go high on the interest rates, we're providing a medicine that it's not needed for the economy. Really. And that won't do much for inflation also.
Listen to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Matias Vernango. He's a professor of economics at Bucknell University. If you've got a thought, question, comment, we want to hear from you. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. You can join in as we're talking about inflation and some of the cures possibly on how we get out of this. Also, if you're just joining us, make sure you grab the podcast, take the program on the go, and never miss a moment. Now, election time coming up around the corner. Inflation, the number one issue, by far, without question, no matter what's going on in Ukraine, no matter what's going on elsewhere, inflation is it. What should the Biden administration be doing? Joe Manchin thinks, tightening the belt, austerity, this is the route to bring down spending. This is how we're going to deal with inflation. What should Biden be doing?
Well, I can tell you what they shouldn't be doing. And what they shouldn't be doing is the two things that they, I think, will do. And I'm sorry to say, this is the part that sounds like a return of the 1970s. So the 1980 election. So, well, we're 2 years from the presidential election. But, 78, what Carter did, he brought Paul Volcker. Paul Volcker hiked interest rates to the stratosphere. What led to the defeat and 12 years of Republican administrations. And in particular, the very first conservative, really, in many ways, at least the cold water kind of conservatives with Ronald Reagan, was the way Carter dealt and Paul Volcker that he dealt with inflation. So very high tax interest rates and fiscal restraint. So the notion that the problem, the famous Malaise sort of speech that he gave, and the idea that the American economy wasn't capable of doing, certain things. And so I think that Biden is probably more willing to do on the fiscal front, expansion and maintain the recovery, but he will face a very hard, sort of tough fight within his own party with Sinema and Manchin clearly, against his agenda. And it seems that on the Fed front, interest rates will, again, I don't think that by the end of the year, the interest rates the impact of higher interest rates will be on the housing market. So that's certainly not good. It's already a complicated situation. We have homeless and we have scarcity of homes and so on and so forth. So that will generate sort of a problem. It will cool down the market. But it has impacts on consumption too through that, because that's one of the important sort of, the refinancing of houses and whatnot allows a certain amount of consumption and people. So it will have an impact on consumption. So that again is a sort of a negative impact on the recovery. So all of that suggests that the economy will slow down and that inflation, let's assume the worst scenario. The war continues for a while, the snags in the supply chain continue. So the supply side stories that are behind inflation continue to be in place. So we will have, by the end of the year, inflation. I don't think that wages are going to maintain and keep up with inflation. So that means that workers will have less money and will have to make adjustment. This is not just energy. Russia and Ukraine produce 25% of the global exports of wheat. So expect foodstuff to go up. In other parts of the world, this will have a really, truly horrible sort of impact on the abilities of certain people to survive. And so from that point of view, I think that we go into an election that it's already complicated for the Democratic Party with an economy that it's as bad as, in many ways as you could expect. Despite the numbers, the official unemployment level is relatively low. But, again, I would take that number with a significant grain of salt, with a lot of doubts of what really means for the working class and working people. So the idea that low unemployment now means the same as it meant back in the 60s or 70s, it should be taken with some degree of skepticism. It's not a good situation. So I think
it's not a great situation. And you look at what's going on in Ukraine, as you pointed out, there's the world is somewhat interconnected and the global economy is suffering. I look at what's going on in Russia, and all indications is the Russian economy is being devastated. But there's a ripple effect across the globe. How significant are the sanctions on the Russian economy, and how significant is that ripple effect going to be across the globe?
So the sanctions are strong, and sanctions do have economic effects. So sanctions might not be a good instrument to change the external policy of Russia. So I don't think that they'll be effective on necessarily stopping Putin, and they're also not effective in terms of regime change. look at Cuba. They have been for 60 years with external sanctions from the U.S. and Castro died in power. His brother resigned, and you still have somebody that is connected to the Communist Party. But they do have a brutal impact on the ability of the people in the country to survive. So it will affect Russia significantly. People that may have nothing to do with the war and what's going on. And the other effect is that Russia is a big provider of key commodities for the world, for Europe, which is central for the U.S. external policy. I mean, Germany imports whatever the number is. It's something humongous. It's 50% of the, don't quote me on that, but it's something big of the natural gas. It's huge amounts of oil. So they depend for their energy from Russia. And that has impacts. I mean, you have to remember these are key allies of the United States, and so this is a problem globally. Also, that means that the price of energy will remain high. These are international, as you said. It is commodity markets. Prices are set in international markets. Of course, we're doing already. Biden sent a mission to Venezuela and a mission to Saudi Arabia. So that implies that there is an effort to get OPEC to make up for some of the effects of the closing up, if you want, of the energy fields in Russia. But this will certainly have an effect. That's why I said I don't think that we're going to see the price in the pump coming down anytime soon, because this may continue for a while. Yeah. But then, the foodstuff and energy, are what economists call basic goods. They enter the production of everything, including themselves. So in order to produce energy, you use energy. And in order to produce food, you use food. So that the problem with that is that their effects are widespread. So this interview is energy and food intensive, so to speak. And so the price of everything goes up. And the question that normally that brings up is once you have those prices going up, it's whether workers will be able to bring up their purchasing power back to the same place. And my guess is that who will suffer with this crisis is fundamentally workers globally. In some places, that will imply restrictions in energy use, which means you have less, you use less, and restrictions on the amount of food that it's available. In some places, that will imply that children will go hungry, that there'll be increased numbers of poverty. I mean, I'm not even talking in Ukraine. Ukraine, apparently, 70-80% of the population now is below the poverty line, whatever the poverty line.
Yeah, you're talking globally. I get that. So the question then becomes, if that's the case, if commodities cost more, prices go up, wages go down, who are the winners in this? Are the firms now much more profitable? Are the margins much bigger? I understand Elizabeth Warren's talking about a profits tax on oil companies. Is this the direction? Because I gotta assume companies who are seeing all these prices going up, they're going to be lining their pockets as well, or is it just it just costs more?
No, I mean, certainly, I would say energy firms certainly will do fine. I mean, the price of oil goes up. I mean, a good chunk of that, I should say, also goes to rents to a lot of these big oil companies, or when they have fields, they depend on particular states that own those fields. So geopolitically, I mean, Saudi Arabia, the company, whatever, it's controlled by the Saudi royal family. So it is a certain group of people, but globally, I would say corporations in general, not just because, as I said, the price of everything. Well, I mean, if you want to buy an iPhone, the price, I'm pretty sure, will go up too, because it's energy intensive and whatnot. Yeah. And the workers at Apple are not going to reap the benefits of that. So it will be the CEOs and the people that have stock and so on and so forth and those things. So yes, we come from a pandemic that was very good for the wealthy, that it wasn't that terrible for the poor to the extent that we managed to provide services and unemployment insurance and so on and so forth. Eliminate evictions and whatnot, but those are vanishing, and the political discourse is turning on those things. So this now looks much more grim in terms of what to expect. So yes, the wealthy will benefit again. The wealthy in general, sure, certain sectors more than others. So I would imagine that fertilizer companies too say, I mean, if we're going to go the sectors, think of this. fertilizers are also chemical goods, that many of those come from Russia and Ukraine, and agricultural prices were going to go up and so on. So all of those things will have sort of impacts, but it is as expected, the working class that will pay the price of this sort of crisis.
As they always do. And this becomes one of those moments, Matias, where you look and you go, this is a massive redistribution of wealth from the working class to the wealth class. Again, because as you pointed out, during the pandemic, the wealth class did really well. The amount of wealth that they pocketed, what was an additional 57%? They saw their wealth grow during the pandemic, some obscene number like that, while the average working class family just saw about a 7% growth. That is below the rate of inflation. That's obscene.
It is. No. So, I mean, in that respect, capitalism, it's, I think it's part of the nature. The accumulation of capital goes with the accumulation of misery, so to speak. The tensions are significant, of course, and we have seen that in the United States in terms of an insurgency and votes of even the word socialist that, I would imagine, when I came to this country 25 years ago, it was a word that you couldn't say. And now you have Democratic Socialists of America in all campuses and so on and so forth. So the word socialism, it's trendy again, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, I don't see this incredible sort of struggle leading to significant changes. That's why I said that it seems that because the party in power in the U.S., the Democratic Party, is in charge of this crisis, they'll be punished, and so I'm not sure what's the end game of this crisis.
I think you're right. Last question I've got for you. I saw a story today that piqued my interest. Saudi Arabia, we went to Saudi Arabia and asked, hey, can you increase production, help out a little bit? I believe we were turned away in hand. And of course, Ted Cruz blamed Joe Biden for this. But there's also a story that says that, Saudi Arabia is thinking about taking the yuan from China as payment for oil. Is this the beginning of a realignment as the dollar of the reserve currency for trading? Is this the beginning of that? I know there was the BRIC currencies that they've been, Brazil, Russia, India, and China were trying to get together. Is this another part of that?
Yeah, it could be certainly. No currency and no country is hegemonic forever. So the BRICS as a group, I don't think it was a creation of JP Morgan, some guy at JP Morgan doing a study. So I think that any sort of connection that might exist, at least on the Brazilian side, hopefully Brazil has presidential elections this year, and Lula should come back to power. So he's far away ahead of all the others together. So that doesn't seem to be and it's not a real sort of. And Russia, of course, is not part of it. I don't think Russia can be considered. But China certainly, but if it is the beginning, and I think the important thing of this story is that a crucial thing that makes the dollar the key global currency is the fact that the dollar is the currency in which the energy commodities are priced on. So that's a central thing. There is a reason why we have military bases all over the Middle East. And it's not, contrary to what most people think, it's not because we want to conquer or colonize the Middle East. It's because the Middle East has a crucial resource globally, which is oil. Yep. And even though the United States doesn't directly need huge amounts, the U.S. is a huge producer with natural gas over the last decade. That went really up. But it is a resource that globally the U.S. has an interest in knowing where it goes and how
Absolutely.
it's
it is our interest. So when they talk about protecting our interests, that is what it is, Matias.
Exactly. That's
always,
exactly it.
Good stuff, man. I appreciate the time. As always, great stuff. Thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, no. Thank you for having me.
Our good friend Matias Vernango, professor of economics there at Bucknell University. Great talk. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Make sure you grab the podcast if you're just joining us. Never miss a moment of the program. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Too long have others spoken for us. Those were the words published on this day in labor history. The year was 1827. This was the message of the co-editors of the Freeman's Journal, the first black newspaper in the United States. Slavery had been outlawed in New York that same year. A group of prominent free African Americans from the Northeast gathered in New York to discuss forming a newspaper. As a result, two young black New Yorkers, John Brown Russwurm and Samuel Cornish, founded the Freeman's Journal. It gave a voice to the 300,000 African Americans living in the North. Black people had been almost entirely left out of the mainstream press or were treated with racism. This new paper focused on black perspectives. It reached 11 states. Its pages covered news and events and took a stand against slavery and lynching. While the paper only lasted a few years, it had done something bigger. It launched the idea of a black press. More black-owned newspapers followed. Before the Civil War, these papers became a leading voice in the call to end the slave labor system. In the early 20th century, black newspapers in northern cities published articles, political cartoons, and advertisements about northern employment opportunities for African Americans living in the Jim Crow South. The black newspaper, the Chicago Defender, was one outlet that led this charge. In 1916, the paper published a political cartoon showing a black man with a broken ankle chain. The word labor was written across his back as he headed toward a train car labeled Northern Industries. It's estimated that 1.5 million African Americans moved north during the Great Migration between 1915 and 1930, transforming the labor force of northern cities.
In corporate speak, there are no, quote, job cuts. Instead, firings are blandly referred to as employment adjustments. Now, though, corporate wordsmiths will need a whole new thesaurus of euphemisms, for masses of job cuts are coming for employees in the higher echelons of the corporate structure. Don't look now, but an unanticipated result of the ongoing pandemic is that it has given cover for CEOs to speed up the adoption of highly advanced RPAs, robotic process automation, to replace employees once assumed to be immune from displacement. As one analyst told a New York Times reporter, with RPA, you can build a bot that costs $10,000 a year and take out 2 to 4 humans. Prior to the COVID crisis, many top executives feared a public backlash if they pushed automation too far too fast. But ironically, the economic collapse caused by the pandemic has so discombobulated the workplace and diverted public attention that corporate bosses have been emboldened to rush ahead. While the nationwide shutdown of offices and furloughing of employees has caused misery for millions, one happy purveyor of RPA systems notes that it has, quote, massively raised awareness among executives about the variety of work that no longer requires human involvement. He cheerfully declares, we think any business process can be automated, advising corporate bosses that half to 2/3 of all the tasks being done at their companies can be done by machines. This is Jim Hightower saying, conventional corporate wisdom blithely preaches that all new technologies create more jobs than they kill. But even these Pollyannish preachers are now conceding that this robotic automation of white-collar jobs is being imposed so widely, suddenly, and stealthily that losses will crush any gains.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So we've been talking about the organizing going on at Amazon. And look, one of the things I think is most interesting is, it's highly decentralized. So it's, it can be, I think Amazon's going to eventually at some point down the road say enough of this already and start going, hey, how can we end this headache and bring everybody under an umbrella at some point? And I think this is going to be way, way down the road. But this morning, about 30 workers at the Amazon distribution center in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. I keep wanting to say New Jersey, but Upper Marlboro, Maryland, walked off the job, leaving managers to, well, do their job. And managers never like to have to do workers' jobs. They just like to sit and point, which left a little bit of chaos, but gave this workers a sense of empowerment, which I think is a good thing. And here to share some thoughts on how that went and what possibly is going to come out of it, I've asked our good friend Dave Jameson to come talk with us. Dave is a labor reporter over at the Huffington Post. You can check out his work at huffpost.com. Dave, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, good to be here.
So, I'm looking at this story. I saw your story this morning about these 30 workers that said, you know what, we've had enough. The poor wages, the difficult working conditions, the poor treatment, all of the stuff that we've heard. Tell me about what happened today.
Yeah, so like you said, it was around 30 workers who walked off the job right around 6 a.m. This is an overnight shift. So these folks were actually in the middle of their shift, and it was their lunch break when they handed a petition demanding an immediate $3 raise, which they did not expect to receive. They did not receive it. So they walked out. And the interesting thing is, 30 workers at an Amazon facility, that may not sound like a lot, but this is a delivery hub. It is not one of their gigantic fulfillment centers where they employ several thousand people. I was told typically around 50 workers are working in there at a given time on a shift. And so this was actually a majority who came out. And I talked to several of the workers who said that as far as they could tell, whoever was left in there was going to have a really hard time getting the job done, and it was going to be high-level managers and low-level supervisors who were going to have to fill in for these workers. And so I thought it was really interesting because this was a rare case where some workers do some kind of job action at Amazon where it actually is large enough proportionally to disrupt the operations. And this, this is kind of the strategy behind this particular group leading this. It's Amazonians United, it's known as. Not a traditional union like the retail, wholesale, and department store union, which has tried to unionize the facility down in Alabama. Certainly not like the Teamsters. This is like a kind of loose-knit group where people have been talking a lot on Zoom over the last couple of years, getting in touch with workers at other facilities. And at this particular facility in Maryland, it seems like they reached a critical mass here where they had enough people to pull off, a pretty notable walkout. And, everyone I talked to felt like it was broad enough and deep enough that they kind of had each other's back. So they had the courage to do it.
Yeah, we're moving into interesting territory, Dave. And if you look at, I'm seeing all of this different organizing going on, and not in the traditional way that I grew up accustomed to. This is kind of going back to where my grandparents, where they began organizing, and maybe even their parents' generation of workers in a workplace saying, hey, we're going to band together under whatever flag that's going to be. And taking direct action in that workplace. I think this is an interesting way of things going about, considering how broken our labor laws are in this moment.
Yeah, the folks here, generally, eschew the sort of traditional route of let's go out and get a bunch of union cards signed. Maybe we can trigger an election. They're really not going that route, certainly not at this point anyway. You might kind of compare it to the Fight for 15 in the sense that this is sort of non-traditional organizing, labor board supervised union elections are not the goal. But it's also not like the Fight for 15 in the sense that this is really decentralized. There's no kind of formal body. These are really just, really does feel essentially grassroots, where you just have workers getting in touch within their warehouses and within one another. And, as this right before, this happened this morning, I went to a bunch of community supporters met up at a Wawa near this Amazon facility. And word about this had just kind of rippled through the progressive community around there. People came out in support, and one of the people talking to the group said, hey, we're just going to go over there with some food and music, and we're going to be there when these workers walk out, and we're going to support them. And they specifically said, if you support if you're with a union or you're a member of a union, great. Don't wear your union insignias though, because this is not about any particular union or promoting a group. We're just supposed to go over there and help the workers. So that was kind of the attitude among the supporters, which I thought was really interesting. And they came out in force. And one worker I talked to said that some of the people had been nervous about walking off and going outside, but then they looked outside and saw, this big welcome party of people with signs, cheering for them, and they came out to that. And it was really fascinating. I mean, I got the sense that, Amazon leadership here really wasn't quite sure how to handle this, because it was such a large group from inside the facility that took part in this.
Yeah, and
they basically took over the kind of the entrance, and they hung out there for a very long time, blasting music, talking on a loudspeaker about their grievances, right there on the facility's doorstep.
And the thing is it's workers' rights to do this, right? I mean, this is their right to act in a collective fashion, because they were asking for better wages, hours, conditions. They actually had a physical ask that clearly was denied, and I'm assuming down the road will be continued to be denied. But this is the part of that process, right?
Yeah, it is. But what they did is protected or supposed to be protected by the National Labor Relations Act. This is concerted activity. They're trying, helping each other in mutual aid. That said, they don't have a big formal union with a whole bunch of lawyers behind them. So it can feel a lot riskier putting your neck out there like this. But they clearly, organized this amongst themselves. And I know they have had, really experienced organizers who may not work. They're like I said, there's no formal body here. These folks are not getting paid that I know of, the ones I've talked to, but there are, long experienced organizers who've been kind of advising these folks, because they think this is an interesting thing to do. And a lot of people are kind of wondering if maybe this kind of, this sort of campaign, which is a little non-traditional and not the typical union route, that maybe this is a way to kind of get some gains at Amazon.
Yeah, I mean, because at the end of the day, while Amazon's saying we're industry leaders, the reality is you're still talking about not family sustaining wages by any stretch of the imagination. And I would argue not even close to a living wage, because I think, in this story, you're saying they're making about $16 an hour in an area that reportedly you need about $20 an hour to live on. So, I mean, these aren't world record-setting wages. They should be doing better.
I was a little surprised by the pay rates, and I say that because you look at like Bessemer, Alabama. I talked to a lot of workers down there who didn't feel like the pay was terrible. They were making, sort of comparable pay to here, but that's a much lower cost of living down in Alabama compared to this is a greater Metro DC area. So, like I said, I was a little surprised. I did kind of think the wages would be higher than 16, but they said folks there, start out around $15.90, and most of the folks I talked to were in the 16 range, and that translates into a salary of, in the low $30,000, which really doesn't get you far in Prince George's County, which it comes right up against DC.
Yeah, and you're talking about this is physical work. I mean, this isn't sitting behind pushing a pencil. This is actual physical work where you're constantly surveilled and constantly pushed for more. So, look, for me, not surprising that folks have had enough of it. And the good thing is they're not just quitting, that they're actually fighting to make things better. And I think that's important. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show here with Dave Jameson. Dave's a labor reporter over at the Huffington Post. You can check his work out over at huffpost.com. We'll get links out over on social media. You can check that out. If you're just joining us, make sure you grab the podcast. Never miss a second of the program. You can do that wherever you grab your podcasts or at thericksmithshow.com. Now, I want to switch gears a little bit, because I saw the report today that Howard Schultz evidently is coming back to Starbucks. We're bringing a union buster back to take care of those union workers there at Starbucks. Or maybe that's just my interpretation of them bringing him out of mothballs. Do you have a different reason why they're bringing Howard back?
I haven't done any reporting on this myself. But I would say that it's very interesting to see Schultz coming back in the fold as an interim CEO as Kevin Johnson steps down, because Howard does have a long history with unions. A lot of people think of the Starbucks union thing as this kind of brand new thing. Certainly, it's never taken off quite like this, but there's a long history there, actually, going back with Schultz in the company's early days. A lot of people don't know he actually, was very proud to have decertified a UFCW union that was there in Washington State, representing folks at the early roastery and some of the first stores there. And this was kind of always part of Schultz's ethos that, as he's always said, I'm going to treat my workers so well that they're not going to need a union. And he was proud that he felt like he convinced people that they did not need a union. But there's always been this kind of, I think, frankly, like sort of a paternalistic vibe to the way he talks about this. As we're seeing now, there's obviously a lot of workers out there who disagree with everything he said about, Starbucks not needing a union. And this is no longer just a handful of workers in Buffalo. This is something we're seeing all over the country. And so I will be very interested to see sort of how Schultz, and if he does rework his message at all, because so far this has been, a really, frankly, like poorly run counter campaign by the company. That nothing they've done legally has stopped this campaign from growing. And they seem to be stepping on rakes a lot. And Schultz himself, when this thing was getting started in Buffalo last year, he went out there to deliver this speech to workers at a hotel. And I don't think he actually used the word union, but that was the pretext of this whole thing. And he ended up making this sort of weird, ill-advised Holocaust analogy. And it was kind of a disaster. So he's I'd say 0 for 1 on kind of, this time around on the union fight. So we'll see sort of what the game plan is here on out. But I think, like, the way this is growing, I think that their strategy is going to have to change, because this is no longer about stamping out a couple of fires in upstate New York. This thing has gotten way beyond that. And I think Starbucks is going to have to figure out how to address this, and at some point lean into it and play ball, and maybe recognize that, a lot of these workers at the end of the day are going to be union members.
No, and for me, this Schultz is one of those guys that has gotten a pass in a lot of Democratic circles, and has been, kind of pushed as, during the Obama years, especially, as, one of the good ones. And, I'm going, no, because I understood his union busting past. And there's this thought, in Democratic circles that, well, he's a good business owner, and you might not necessarily need a union if you work for someone who's wonderful like this, which is why, he's one of the guys, one of the Democratic donor class who was instrumental in destroying the passage of the Employee Free Choice Act. Which would have made organizing easier. So I look at Schultz with a jaundiced eye to begin with, and him coming back is only bad for a whole bunch of reasons, both for the workers at Starbucks, but also politically for Democrats, who had better come around to this moment and pick which side they're going to be on the Democratic donor side or on the worker side.
Yeah, you know your history, Rick. Howard Schultz was actually, on the phone with lawmakers in Hillstaff when EFCO was being discussed, and he sort of like pitched what he framed as like this third way compromise that, labor and many Democrats thought was a terrible idea. But he has always been kind of this centrist, and I think you're right that a lot of Democrats have always kind of liked the guy as this sort of, mild business titan figure. That may be getting harder now, the way the party has shifted. And I think that sort of the presidential run that he mulled for a while there that really did not pan out very well. Maybe things have shifted politically, and, Democrats may not be, so warm to him anymore, but they certainly have been until now.
Yeah, but don't get me wrong. Look, I don't mind a benevolent dictator. I don't mind someone who like Schultz, who I would view as a benevolent dictator, wants to do the right things. But you should also have that strong union there to make sure that their benevolence is written down on a piece of paper so that when they change their mind and try and go back on their benevolence, there's a way to fight back against it. That's all. Because we've seen this kind of movie played out in numerous places across the country. I talk to people all the time. Well, I worked for a company and the owner was fantastic and his kids took over and everything went to hell. That's because you didn't have it in writing. This is just that playing out on a much larger scale. Just my thoughts.
So Schultz, like I said, he's always seen Starbucks as being such a good employer that it doesn't need a union. I think it's good to remember that Starbucks is certainly not the worst out there.
No.
There's certain aspects to the company. You look at, the access you can get to healthcare, as a part-time worker, things like that. There's worse food service employers out there, no doubt. What I think Schultz and others kind of fail to grasp sometimes is that there's a lot of reasons why workers might want a union, and it might not even necessarily be about a raise or benefits. You talk to some of these workers and why they're doing this. They have, issues with staffing, and a lot of them generally just sort of want some kind of seat at the table. They want some sort of formal voice to have at work. And people like Schultz don't necessarily understand that. No. And for them, I think it really can be. Like I think a guy like Schultz can literally take it personally when he sees people, under him, like trying to unionize like this. I think it does sting, actually.
Yeah, and some of it could also be how workers are treated. Some of the people that I've talked to, treatment and respect is a huge part of this as well. We'll see how it plays out. I'm sure you'll be reporting on it, and I hope folks will take a look at your reporting. You're one of my favorite labor reporters out there. Keep up the great work, Dave. I appreciate you taking some time for us.
Thanks, Rick. Good talking to you.
Great stuff. Our good friend Dave Jameson. Make sure you check out the work that he does over at Huffington Post, huffpost.com, the website. Dave Jameson, labor reporter. Check it out. We're going to take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. Remember, if you've missed any of the program, download the podcast. You can get that anywhere from iTunes to iHeart, Podbean, Stitcher, everywhere in between. Take the program on the go. Quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people on the talk.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute. One 416 Rick. 1-866-416-7425. You got a question, comment, thought, something on your mind? Want to hear it? You can also email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. I do want to pick up on something there because Dave made an interesting point. This idea that Howard Schultz is truly hurt by the unionization efforts and taking it personally. And look, I've seen that dynamic played out. Much smaller level, but it's still the same dynamic. I remember a small company that the owner treated his employees like family. Used to like have them over for Thanksgiving dinner, we're talking years ago, but still had that in the mind that the same handful of people that worked the first months of his business were still working with the company at the time. And as he got older, he transferred responsibility over to the kids, and the kids took over, and well, they saw dollars, and it wasn't about, being part of the family anymore. It was about squeezing the quarter till the eagle screamed. It was about making more money. It wasn't about, caring as much. And as it went further down the road, as the original owner got further away from the business and was just more of a figurehead, it became more apparent that it wasn't the same company. And these workers are like, hey, screw this. We're working longer hours. We're working harder. We're making this company more money than it's ever made before. We should be sharing in this profit. And at the time, the union that I was a member of was going to organize it. And I remember the owner was beyond furious. How dare you do this? How dare you do this to me? I've been good to you. This kind of this visceral anger, and I understand that because he believed that he was this benevolent dictator, that this was somehow an indictment of him, and it's not. The reality is, I've made this argument for years. If you get to a certain point of employing people, you should want to have a union to deal with some of your HR headaches, to ensure that everyone's on the same page, that a contract ensures that everyone knows their place and their responsibilities. There's a lot of good that comes out of this, but it's this adversarial situation that we have, and the fact that the workplace is a fiefdom. This guy saw himself as this paternalistic figure. These are my people. I take care of them. They depend on me. When the reality is the business depends on the people just as much. The folks who come to work every day and do whatever it is that business does, that business is just as dependent on those workers as those workers are on that business. It is a mutual relationship. And there should be a mutual benefit. And this is the part that I think a lot of the top folks seem to forget. Now, look, Howard Schultz has been one of the good employers. I'm not taking that away in no way, shape, or form. They were ahead of the time for a while. Now what happens? Well, you now have the original guy stepping away. And just like the kids in the other example, it's now about squeezing the bottom line. It's now about delegating authority to others who want power. And what happens? They abuse it. This isn't rocket science. It's not hard to figure out. And what happens? There's a pushback. So now they're going to bring Howard Schultz back, and Howard's going to come in, and he's going to go on a charm offensive. And what he's going to find is this isn't the company he built. These aren't the people that he nurtured. These aren't the relationships that he had. And he's going to get angry about it. And I think it's going to get ugly. And this is why I'm hoping that the workers stand their ground, continue on their course, and hopefully Starbucks comes to their senses. And if they do, it will make for a better company. I worked for a company for 20 years who touted the fact that they had the best trained people in the industry. Why? Because they had a 1% turnover rate. Their unionized workforce had a 1% turnover rate, which meant they didn't have to go searching for new people every day. They didn't have to worry about training new people. They had highly skilled, highly qualified people who showed up and went to work because they were paid a reasonable wage. They had excellent benefits. They had a career job. They were invested in that company because that company was invested in them. That's the kind of employment market we should be seeking, not how we can squeeze people and force them into jobs and guilt them into employment. It should be a mutual benefit situation. It should be you do better and I do better. We all do better when we all do better. Seems reasonable, seems sane, seems rational, seems like something we should aspire to. But sadly, there are those, they just want the power. We'll see what Howard Schultz does. I'd be interested in your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, make sure you grab the podcast. You can do that at thericksmithshow.com or anywhere, wherever you get your podcast, from iTunes to iHeart, Stitcher to Podbean, Google, Audible, wherever you get your pods. We are there. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.